Once again, we are back with the next episode in our Jonathan Strange read-along. And this time, which chapters are we reading? You have the numbers.
I do. We were reading from chapter 33, Place the Moon at My Eyes.
Yes.
Through to 44, Arabella.
Yes, so at the end of part 2.
Yeah, so it was quite a big chunk once again. And once again, I've made notes.
Yes. A lot happened in that section.
A lot. A lot.
Give me, just as you've now exited that section, give me, in a word, your emotions.
Have you ever seen that gif of the creatures from Spirited Away where they're just being hit by the waves?
Oh yes, and someone put
feels.
Yeah.
And they're just like... That was me!
It hits like a train.
It does.
Let's go through. So in this section, seeing as you've taken some notes, would you like to give us a little rundown of some of the things that happen in this section?
Okay. So we'll start at chapter 33, Place the Moon at My Eyes. And this goes back to Jonathan Strange being with the king, and he's in the gardens at Windsor Castle with the king and the gentleman with the thistledown hair. And I said at the end of the last video that I thought perhaps the gentleman was quite sympathetic to the king and wanted to help Jonathan to take him outside because he felt sorry for him and the conditions he was being kept in. Oh, what a fool I was 1 week ago.
But there is something there about for the fact that the king can see the gentleman with the thistledown hair implies some form of synergy, some form of, that were things different.
Yeah.
Were Stephen Black not in the picture, that perhaps they could have got on.
Yeah.
Except Jonathan Strange is in the mix too.
Yeah.
And he has his own understanding of how things are going.
Yeah.
And so, yes.
So the gentleman is trying to... He's literally lying on my notes.
This looks like a comfortable place to sit.
So the gentleman with the thistledown hair is trying to entice the king and Jonathan, by extension, to Lost Hope through magic. Jonathan, thankfully, manages to use some very old magic to stop this from happening.
Place the moon at your eyes and all that.
Exactly. So he manages to stop that from happening and get the king safely back into Windsor Castle. And he talks to Mr. Norrell about whether fairies take a particular interest in madmen. And it turns out, yes, historically they have taken an interest in madmen. And he learns also about the fairy roads, about these routes between the fairy realm and our realm that historically the fairies have used. So yeah, my previous assertion that the gentleman had some semblance of sympathy with the king was very much misplaced.
I'm very much enjoying reading everyone's theories as to what's going to happen. and smugly giggling at some and going, okay, that's others. But that was one that, that was a swing and a miss. But there is at least something there.
The next chapter, On the Edge of the Desert, the gentleman with the thistledown hair takes Stephen Black to Africa, in inverted commas. And he says, we're in Africa, in your ancestral homeland. And Stephen's like, this cannot be where my ancestors are from. These people, yes, they're darker than the English, but they're clearly fairer than I am. And then the gentleman's just like, I thought that was quite interesting.
Yes.
Because it shows that the gentleman doesn't care enough about humanity to note that Africa is a whole continent.
Yeah.
Which is a problem that Africans and the African diaspora have to this day.
Even in the last video, I said King of Africa,
Yeah.
and then immediately call myself.
Yeah.
So even us woke fellows misspeak too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just goes to show, exactly. The gentleman with the thistledown hair doesn't. He has a very, very limited understanding of humans.
Yeah, he's just like, oh, Africa, that one country of Africa. When Stephen's like, well, these people are of Arabic origin. This must be North Africa. Maybe this is like Tunisia or Morocco or somewhere like that.
Doesn't mean a thing to the gentleman.
Doesn't mean a thing. He's just like, Africa. So that I thought was quite telling.
Yeah.
Tells us a little bit more about the gentleman. I think we all knew already that he didn't care much for humanity, but yeah, even more telling about him. He then goes on to tell Stephen about Jonathan Strange very cruelly thwarting his plan to whisk the King of England away to Lost Hope. He says, we must find some other way to crush the magician's spirit so they no longer have the will to oppose us. Spooky scary, don't like it.
Yes, and yeah, this whole kind of section is like a descent into that exact thing of how is the gentleman going to crush the spirits, and you kind of think all along the way, every step of the way, you think he's going to get thwarted at some point.
Yeah.
The magicians are going to notice.
Yeah.
Everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
But what happens?
So he starts discussing that he would like a new female companion to come to Lost Hope, and in my head I was immediately like, oh my god, leave Arabella alone. Leave Arabella alone, and then, we'll come to it, but...
We'll come to it.
There is a fun little story about him trapping his enemies in the patterns in carpets, which...
Again, brilliant, vivid imagery magic, and once again, not explained mechanistically, which, again, continues the kind of theme of how the magic works in this book.
Yeah, the soft magic system in this book
continues to be a chef's kiss.
Yeah, beautiful. We then move on to chapter 35, The Nottinghamshire Gentleman. So this takes us back to London, where Jonathan Strange meets a young man in a billiards club.
And is very rude to him.
Is very rude to him.
Yeah.
He's a very self-important and pompous and horrible. And it made me really go...
Yeah. Again, it's kind of showing that Jonathan Strange is actually a bit of a nasty guy.
Yeah.
And it kind of also makes him interesting again.
Yeah. None of these characters are one-dimensional.
Yeah.
Which I think is really very well done.
Yeah.
This guy, the Nottinghamshire Gentleman, reckons that he's been receiving tuition in magic from Jonathan Strange, who he's never met, by letter.
Yeah.
At the same time, Arabella has met a woman at another lady's house who reckons she's been receiving tuition from Jonathan Strange by letter.
So something's
afoot, yeah.
Yes.
One of Jonathan's friends suggests to him that he will prove that he is the real Jonathan Strange to this Nottinghamshire gentleman by walking into a mirror, which he does.
Yes.
I thought this was an interesting chapter because, as we mentioned, it showed that Jonathan Strange can actually be a bit of a pompous little prick.
Yeah.
And so can all his friends. Because they were like, the reason that they didn't like this guy from Nottinghamshire is that he was speaking in the manner of a farmer or of a tradesman.
Yes, and they were also hogging the billiards table too, and not giving them any consideration.
Yeah. So rude. My little working class heart was like... When my revolution comes, they will be the first against the wall.
Yeah. As in, Georgian gentlemen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dandies. What's a modern day? What is the modern day dandy?
I don't know. I guess Instagram influencers?
Yeah, let's go with that. First against the wall.
Jonathan goes into the mirror. In chapter 36, he comes out the other side of the mirror into Hampstead.
Oh, yes. A place very, very fondly familiar.
Yeah, after I just said my working class heart, I actually used to live in Hampstead. Those of you who are not familiar with North London won't know this, but Hampstead is the most expensive postcode in Europe.
But at the time of the story, Hampstead was just a little village outside of London, and perhaps not quite to that level.
No.
But yes, it is. It pops up quite a lot in these books. It pops up in The Woman in White as well, actually.
Yeah. I think it was never gentrified. It was always for the gentry.
Yeah.
It was always posh.
Yes, always posh.
I will say, for the record, that when I lived in Hampstead, I lived in a illegal sublet above a charity shop with a staircase that I thought was going to die every time I stood on it.
Yeah.
And I paid like 80% of my salary for the privilege.
Yes.
So, but it was great because I was like 1 minute from Hampstead Heath. So,
yeah.
Anyway.
All right, recharge of tea.
Thank you.
There we go.
We had an emergency. We needed more tea.
Yeah.
So, chapter 36, All the Mirrors in the World.
So Jonathan Strange emerges through the mirror.
Into Hampstead.
Discovers, what was her name again?
Mrs. Bulworth.
Mrs. Bulworth.
Who had been married to Mr. Bulworth, had an affair with Mr. Lascelles, who had encouraged her to divorce her husband and run away, and then left her. And had tried to employ Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell to inflict all sorts of horrors on her enemies through Mr. Drawlight. The downside of this being that Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell had no idea about any of this.
Yeah.
So Jonathan Strange discovers Mrs. Bulworth and Mr. Drawlight and informs Mrs. Bulworth that, I'm afraid I can't do any of that. That's horrible.
Yeah.
And this man is a fraud.
I didn't actually pick up. I'm not sure if I missed something, but I know that Lascelles was involved, but I didn't think that he was the person that she was having the affair with.
Yeah.
So even on 2 reads, then maybe I missed that. Yes, she wasn't very fond of Lascelles after all of this.
Yeah, it was Lascelles that she was having the affair with.
Oh dear. Well,
Naughty boy.
Naughty boy. So we get a bit more of just how bad Lascelles is as well.
Yeah, exactly. And we get a bit about the King's Road.
The King's Roads.
Because Jonathan then goes home and finds all his friends and Arabella in uproar because they think he's disappeared into the mirror and we have no idea where he's gone, and he had to walk 5 miles home from Hampstead.
Yes, again.
Which is a long way, having walked from Hampstead into London. It's a fair old walk.
Yeah, no public transport at that time.
No.
You couldn't just hop on the red bus.
No, or on the Northern Line.
Or on the Northern Line. Such things did not exist.
No, but he gets home and everyone's like, oh my God, where the hell have you been? And he's like, I walked through the King's Roads, which we find out was a network of roads connecting every mirror in the world that was created by the Raven King, which is amazing. And Jonathan Strange is like, is everybody missing the fact that I've just rediscovered this incredible thing? And you're all just more worried about where I've been for the last 3 hours.
Yes, so once again, showing Jonathan Strange's inability to inhabit the mind of anyone else.
Can't see past the end of his nose.
Which is a very long nose.
Yeah, apparently.
A very aquiline nose.
Yeah, but the main takeaway that I've taken from this section is where I've just written, draw light.
Yes. What a rogue.
What a rogue.
What a rogue.
What a rogue.
The complete and total destruction of your initial feelings towards Draw Light.
But we do discover in the next chapter, which is called the Cinq Dragons, or as I'm going to call them because my French accent is dreadful, the 5 Dragons.
Cinq Dragons.
The Cinq Dragons. The 5 Dragons. Drawlight is completely disgraced. He's being turned away from every house in London apart from Lascelles, who, upon finding this out, then instructs his servants to not admit Drawlight again, and is shortly after incarcerated for debt.
It was coming.
It was coming.
It was coming.
This kind of completes our picture of Lascelles as well. Like, we always knew he was a bit of a wrong-un, but he is a... is what I've written here. There's no accountability for his role in Mrs. Bulworth's disgrace. He's completely turned his back on Drawlight.
And basically, at this point, or approaching the point, where he's going to be Norrell's only, well, apart from Childermas, I guess, one of Norrell's only friends.
Yeah.
Well, is Childermas Norrell's friend? No, he's not really. It's a different relationship.
It's a different relationship entirely.
Yeah, so
Norrell is so enraged by all of this that he calls to reinstate the Cinq Dragons.
the quarters of the Cinq Dragons, yes.
Yeah.
An antiquated magical legal system, form for trying crimes against magic, of which he sees this very much as a crime against magic.
Yeah, there's a long list of the crimes that the 5 Dragons...
Of which book murder would have been one of them.
Yeah.
The thing that Clegg was accused of.
Yeah, and also impersonating a magician, plotting to use magic to harm, things like that. So he wants to bring back this antiquated court of magic. He even goes to Lord Liverpool, the Prime Minister, and tries to argue that they should bring back this court. Lord Liverpool very much puts that to bed.
Yes.
Especially when it becomes clear to Lord Liverpool that Norrell's primary reason for wanting this is so no other magician can rise to prominence and question him.
Yeah.
He doesn't want anyone contradicting him. And Lord Liverpool is like, you are not the only authority in magic. You have to, I as a politician have to argue with people day in, day out. You can't put in a whole court system to make sure nobody questions your judgment.
Yes.
What?
So Mr. Norrell essentially wants to be the authority on magic, and the best way to be the authority on magic is to essentially write the book on magic.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we're going from here.
We know from earlier chapters that Norrell has been instructing Lord Portishead to write the Friends of English Magic review, which is being edited in part by Lascelles and part by Lord Portishead. They produced a book, but Norrell and Strange have been encouraging Lord Portishead, I say encouraging Lord Portishead to remove any praise of the Raven King from this book. That's in spite of the fact that Lord Portishead's previous works have been things like the child's book of the Raven King. So this book comes out and there's like no mention of the Raven King, or any mention of him is either in passing or very scathing. And Jonathan Strange is like, this is completely like revisionist history. So he writes a really scathing review and sends it to the Edinburgh Review, which you'll remember from earlier, Norrell wanted nothing to do with because it's a fairly revolutionary publication.
Mm-hmm. Notice you putting this in your notes, but yes, it made me too feel very, very uncomfortable for the sake of poor Lord Portishead, who's just done what he's been asked to do.
Yeah.
And has, written something that perhaps he didn't, he felt was compromised, and then basically having the person who helped him write it, one of the people who helped him write it, come out and say exactly that. Yeah. We feel a bit bad for Lord Portishead.
I feel sorry for Port
Portishead.
Lord Portishead. The next chapter, 38, the Edinburgh Review, is basically just the contents of Jonathan's review.
Yeah.
Which was a short little chapter, and the first time I read it, I was just like, oh, that was weird. But then I went back and reread it. And when I was making these notes, I really started thinking about it. It's deep. Because first of all, he claims that Joseph of Arimathea was a magician.
Yes, the owner of the tomb of which Jesus was entombed within. And in British folklore, Joseph of Arimathea then sailed to England and was a founding father of England.
What?
I know.
That's fairly important.
Yep.
He then goes into some of the supposed accomplishments of the Raven King, like making the moon disappear from the sky and travel through the rivers and lakes of England. That's fairly big.
Yeah.
Banishing winter for 4 years. Having everyone share a dream of building a great tower.
That's really spooky. That's really spooky.
Apparently that like held off the Black Death. So this is building up this chapter, this mystique of the Raven King, and like of his power and of his importance in the history of English magic.
Yes, and up until this point he's basically been a shadow over the story.
Yeah.
Now he kind of comes in as a individual.
So we've learned about the King's Roads in the previous couple of chapters, and now we're learning about his accomplishments in the past.
Yes.
So he's really taking form. So although this was a small chapter that was kind of out of keeping with the rest of the book, I think it's an important one.
I think it's almost like a bit of a pivot point for where the rest of the book is going.
Yeah.
More on that later.
Yeah. What?
More on that later.
Anyway, chapter 39, The Two Magicians, and this is where I absolutely nailed it. It's the fallout from Jonathan Strange's review.
Yeah, and Laura does deserve credit for this. She absolutely predicted this 100%. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell fall out. Yeah. Unsurprisingly, based on what has just happened.
Yeah. So they fall out massively. Norrell explains why he wants to erase the history of the Raven King from the record. It's a flawed logic. I can kind of see his reasoning.
It was Mr. Norrell being a human for the first, or being, the way that could have gone would have been Mr. Norrell just shutting Jonathan Strange down and being very, very nasty, but actually it was surprisingly sympathetic. Yeah,
I came away from it feeling a bit sorry for him.
Yeah.
Which is weird. He even offers Jonathan Strange equal partnership and says that you can come to Hertfew and read anything you want, which I was like...
Yes, and that, if you put it on the paper, that's basically everything that Jonathan Strange has ever wanted, is the ability to have access to all of that, and his pride causes him to essentially turn it down. That's him moving on.
But he declines and he goes back to Shropshire. Lascelles, meanwhile, is encouraging Norrell to blackmail Jonathan Strange. He's saying, we're going to blackmail him and saying that we're going to release the black magic that he did in Spain. All these horrible things. Lascelles is such a wrong-un.
He's a real wrong-un.
He is. Now we get to chapter 40. This was a long chapter.
It's a very long chapter.
And a lot happened. There's a lot of examples of improvised magic, which is, Jonathan Strange's forte, versus Norrell's more studious magic. Basically, Napoleon has returned from exile. He's expected to invade Belgium. So the now Duke of Wellington has gone to Brussels, and Jonathan Strange goes to find him there. His scrying reveals the French army to the south of Brussels, whereas the Allied forces are to the west and north and the east. So Jonathan Strange moves the entire city of Brussels to somewhere in America.
And it clearly does show his improvisation because he just says, I just picked an area of the map that felt empty.
So bizarre.
I love this bit as well where, I think this was after he got back, but basically where Jonathan Strange instructs the birds. Well, first of all, he gets the baker to draw like the instructions and the icing of the buns.
Yeah.
And then he instructs the birds to sing a song, which then they keep singing and start annoying everyone.
Yeah.
All of the magic in this chapter is probably, again, is among my favourite moments of magic in the entire book.
And then we come to the Battle of Waterloo.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as they said Napoleon has come back from exile, I was like, oh no.
Here it comes.
The Battle of Waterloo's coming. So Jonathan Strange uses an ancient spell to foresee the outcome of the battle, which is obviously horrific, and then immediately regrets it. And it's like, why am I meddling with magic made for kings? Because this is a spell of the Raven Kings.
Yeah.
And then he spends the entirety of the battle like creating men of water to throw themselves at flames, to douse fires, creating hands coming out of the mud to pull down cavalry charges, like doing all these amazing feats of magic. Obviously, the Battle of Waterloo, we know, was a massacre on both sides. Like, so many thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people were killed. It was a dreadful battle.
I found it interesting that he had Jonathan Strange within one of the diamonds, those famous diamonds that are in the, you know, if you've ever watched the film Waterloo or ever done any study into the Battle of Waterloo, the tactics of Waterloo are in this book as well. It's kind of really interesting.
Yeah. And then they had Mr. Pink of Welbeck Superior Buttons, who had come as a messenger from Wellington to deliver a message to Strange.
It's another weird eccentricity of this book. But where has that come from? It's just dropped in.
It was exactly what I was saying last week about the levity of the book in really grave situations. So, like, he's in one of the diamonds, everyone around him's dying, there are horses dying everywhere, a man's just had his head sliced open, and then Mr. Pinks of Welbeck's Superior Buttons is like, do you think the Duke would like some buttons? What?
It's wonderful.
It's wonderful. What an amazing book, honestly. That was chapter 40. What chapter? What to take away from that chapter, apart from the incredible improvised magic of Jonathan Strange, the disgusting loss of life at the Battle of Waterloo, the depravity of war. Moving on. Chapter 41, Staircross.
Oh, yes. I can see on your notes here a little heart next to Mr. Secundus. Returns to the story once again. We discovered that there's a big online romance fanfic community between Mr. Secundus and Childermas.
Yeah, people really ship Secundus and Childermas.
There's
apparently.
art. There's art.
Very intense art.
Quite intense.
We're not here to yuck on anyone's yums. But wow.
I can see it, yeah.
Anyway, so Mr. Secundus is back. He has become a tutor in magic out of necessity. He has to take up a profession. And one of the parents of one of his pupils has asked him to go to Staircross Hall to view the library because they're considering purchasing some of the books. So he goes there and he meets the Mrs. Lennox, who is an entrepreneurial widow. He also catches what he thinks is a glimpse of Lady Pole, which is weird and wasn't really elaborated on. But they decide to open a school for magic. So Mrs. Lennox is saying, you know, why have you only got a handful of private pupils? Why don't we open a school? So they go about doing it up, making it a nice school of magic, and then are warned off by Norrell via Childermas.
Yes. Norrell has sent his dog.
I found this chapter a bit of a whiplash after the high drama of chapter 40.
Yeah, it's a bit dramatically... yeah.
I found my attention waning.
Did you?
Yeah, I found after chapter 40 where everything was kicking off and like everyone was dying, mud everywhere, blood everywhere, magic happening. Suddenly we're with Mr. Secundus at this genteel school. I was just like,
I guess one could argue that we needed something less action-packed after such an action-packed chapter, but maybe it could have come down more smoothly, perhaps?
Yeah, my only, commentary on this was, we stand Secundus.
Yes, we do indeed. Yes, Secundus, our main man.
Yeah, we love him. Chapter 42, Strange decides to write a book, and despite the title of this chapter, Jonathan Strange is barely in this.
Yes, it's kind of noted at near the start, or that basically that Strange is this is his intention.
Yeah,
and then the rest of the chapter is about everyone else
and their reaction to it. Yeah, so this is about the reaction of Norrell, who unsurprisingly is not best pleased, and also the reaction of the gentleman with the thistledown hair. The gentleman has whisked Stephen Black away to dig up a moss oak from a bog in Scotland.
I loved this bit.
So spooky.
So spooky.
So spooky. Poor Stephen. He's like drowning in a bog.
Yeah.
The gentleman doesn't even seem to care.
Yeah. I think, yes, you could say that. I think he does, but is kind of completely aloof to Stephen's needs and thinks he knows what is best for Stephen.
But when Stephen's like, "Sir, could I trouble you to please rescue me from this bog?"
Yes.
And he's like, "Oh."
Yes. It was not difficult for the gentleman to sort that out.
And then he made him sleep like on the ground in a bog.
Yeah.
For 9 hours. We do learn a bit more about Fey magic in this chapter, which is interesting. Stephen observes while the gentleman is singing that the world is awake and waiting to be spoken to in a language that it understands. That he had previously thought that, when a person sings, only other humans are listening. Occasionally, perhaps their dog or cat or a particularly intelligent horse might turn to listen. But when the Fae sing, everything is listening.
Yeah, I'm really glad you picked up on this because I think it is a significant element as well.
Yeah.
That is really, really important.
And we learn that the reason that he wants this moss oak is it's part of his ploy to lure another woman to his side at a lost hope. And I've written and underlined, "Leave Arabella alone." Okay, chapter 43, The Curious Adventure of Mr. Hyde. And I've written here, is this alluding to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde?
I've been wondering about this too. I don't think it's a coincidence.
No, it can't be.
You can't call someone Mr. Hyde and then them not to be, but the thing is, yes, it's intentional, but I can't work out what her intent was.
So Mr. Hyde is his neighbour who visits to warn Mr. Strange that he has seen Arabella in the Welsh Hills during a snowstorm, which is odd. And Mr. Strange is just like, no, you didn't.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Arabella's brother has come to stay with them for Christmas. Then Christmas comes. Arabella is sick with a headache over Christmas, which happens to me all the time. Jonathan wakes up in the middle of the night and thinks he sees her sitting at the end of the bed. On Boxing Day, Mr. Hyde returns and says, "I've seen her again on the hills in a black dress." And Jonathan's like, "You're crazy. First of all, she doesn't wear black. Second of all, I've just seen her in bed." And then their manservant comes down and says, "She's gone."
Yeah.
They're all thrown into uproar. Jonathan does some scrying, tries to work out where she is. The scrying bowl, he can't make sense of it. He sees her at a ballroom with lots of finely dressed men and women and goes, "The spell isn't working," and dashes the water across the room. They search for her day and night, day and night. Eventually she turns up wearing a black gown.
Yes. And here Jonathan Strange acts rather poorly.
Yeah, "Where did you get that gown?" Let me tell you, if I go missing and I turn up soaking wet, and the first thing he says is, "Where did you get that gown?" and walking straight back out, not good.
Not good.
And then finally, chapter 44, Arabella is weird and answers all the questions about where she's been.
Referring to being cold.
Yeah, and leaving puddles of mossy water everywhere.
Yeah.
In a way that we, the reader, know is because she's actually a piece of moss oak. But they, the characters, have no idea. And then she dies.
It's so crushing, the end of that chapter.
The way it's just like, on the third day, she dies.
It just proves how effective, how good Susanna Clarke is at delivering a gut punch in a very simplistic way. And then the chapter ends and part 3 begins. I went upstairs to check in on Laura and she said, "I just want to be alone." And then I started to go and she said, "Don't leave me."
My poor Arabella.
Laura has not been quite the same since. Been having to bring her tea and biscuits and wipe her eyes. It's gutting. Yeah, it's an absolutely gutting point of the book.
Things to take away from this section, Ross.
Things to take away. Susanna Clarke, why do you do this?
Why do you do this? Why do you hurt me so? Also, Jonathan Strange is very good at improvised magic.
So part 3, going into part 3, we've left Jonathan Strange in a place of grief.
Yes.
He is planning to write a book. Is that going to happen now? Who knows?
I have no idea. I don't know what's going to happen in part 3. I don't even know if we're following the same characters.
yeah, it's actually just a different book. So things are gonna, part 3 is a very weird section. I'm looking forward to you getting into part 3 because it feels odd.
I feel like they're gonna have to go to Lost Hope at some point.
He doesn't know that she's there.
He's a magician.
He assumes that she's dead, right?
He's not stupid. Actually,
he was kind of aloof.
maybe he is stupid.
Anyway, we'll see what happens.
Oh God.
What did you make of that section? What have you made of the book so far? This is an interesting point to check in.
The Raven King has to come back.
Well,
it's all been building. All of this stuff about who he was, all these things about all these amazing things that he's achieved.
There must be something Raven King-ish.
The Raven King is coming.
And with that,
he must be.
We will leave you there. And we hope that you have enjoyed, again, these videos.
This all down.
Please tune into the next one. Let us know your thoughts on Fable, or in the comments, or on Discord. Thank you once again, and we will see you in the next one.